So now we're moving on to the third part to this particular lesson. Probably will exceed an hour, but never mind. And this is index and matching. So we looked at the VLOOKUP function earlier, and the VLOOKUP is useful for looking up information in a table and returning values, and you can use it for a few different things. But why would we particularly want to use index and matching? Well, as I'll explain in a second, it's more versatile to use this because you can have a table which is in any order, doesn't really matter, and you can specify what you're looking by matching values depending upon what column, for example, you use a column header, or what serial you want to find, in much the same way, I suppose, as you use the VLOOKUP. So I'll work through it. So it's complicated because you're doing something called nesting, and in this case we're going to have three functions all working within the same, four if you include an if error, but let's not worry about that at the moment. So you're going to have index and two matches, but we'll look at that. So first of all, indexing is a method of pointing to something. So if you imagine a table and you tell the program which row to go to and which column to align to, you end up with an intersection, and the contents of the cell are returned as the answer. Now this may have its uses, but it's a bit inflexible, so you'd have to specify the numbers. So for example, 1 1 would be the first cell in the first row in the first column. You could refer to cells, but again, it's not really going to change very much. It's not going to be particularly versatile. By introducing a match to replace the specified row or column number, you're now making it much more flexible and powerful. The match function looks at a range, either the column or the row. So you say, for example, A1 to A500 would be a column, or you might say A1 through to Z1. That would be a column header, and the other one would be rows. So you can specify a range that the match looks at. Why is it useful? It doesn't have to be in the first column, like the VLOOKUP table, so that the serial number you're looking at doesn't have to be ordered that particular way. Secondly, if you're using match, then again the order of the columns could change, but it wouldn't make any difference. It would be checking and matching everything that looks across there. The only thing to be aware of is obviously if there's a spelling mistake or if there are spaces, then the computer will read those as two different things. In other words, if let's say you've got copy with two Y's and your cell only wants you to match copy with one Y, then it won't pick up that cell. It won't pick up that match. So that's something to be aware of. And also if there's copy and then a space after it, again, it would be a problem. So just be aware of little things like that. So looking at the construction of the formula, we'll look at index first. So the first part is the function. So index, you always start with an equals sign, and then you have the brackets and then close it. The A1 to N500 in green is the range that you want the program to look at. So that will be part of it. And then the ones, in this case, the first one is the row number and the second one is the column number. Fairly simple function as it stands. The match function, that has a lookup cell, which is B6 in this case, and then it has a range. So as an example here, you could actually put a value in match. So for example, you could put in a bit of text or a number or something like that, and then it would look for that in the range you've specified. Now again, similar to VLOOKUP, you have a value at the end, the blue 0 there, and what that is saying, okay, it's got to be an exact match if it's 0, or if it can be an approximate match, it can be 1. So in this case, we generally always want it to be exact. So again, looking at that, I've just described what they are. We don't, I think, need to cover it off again. So the next step is to combine both. So here we have a rather complex looking thing. So we have the index function to start with the range A100 to N5600, and then the first match function here is referring to the row number. So if you look here, it goes F1 down to row F5600, and it matches whatever's in cell B6. The second one is looking at the column, and in this case it's looking for QTY, and you enclose it in speech marks, and it's looking at the headers here, so A1 to N1. And again, in both cases, they want exact matches. So it looks very complicated, but in reality, if you break it down and work through it, you can see where all of the information comes from. So now we've adapted the formula to replace the specified column and row numbers with index with match functions as I've described. Again, if you want to make it more complicated, you could enclose all of that in an if error as well, which would be helpful in some cases. So again, the best way to do this is to demonstrate. So I'm just going to switch over to the sheet, and then what I want to do is I want to go to the sample data sheet here. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select row A1 to N1. Now I already know that I've got a named range here, so all I'm going to do here is select that, and then I'm going to call this column. So what am I doing? I'm highlighting the first row of the table, and I'm going up to the address bar, and I'm typing in column, which will save that as a specific referenced column with a name. And then I'm going to do the same with F1 right down to F5194. And then again, I'm going to go into this address bar, and I'm going to call this rows. In fact, just row. Press return. Now the reason I've done that will become apparent. It just makes things a bit easier to write and do, and we're just kind of using a bit more speed on that. So now I want to go to sheet 1, cell D7. So we'll go to D7, and then I want to enter a formula. So I'm going to start the index. Oops, again equals index, and you can see it starts to populate. Now I know the table array is referred to as SD. So if you type in SD, you'll see it'll refer to that table. Double click on that, and then if I put a comma, it's now saying, well, which row in this do you want me to refer to? And now we're going to put a match function in. Now I want to refer to the same cell on this sheet, B6. And I want to make that an absolute reference. So if I just put $signs around that, so all I've done there is I've said, okay, I'm going to use that information because it's already there, and I want you to look up that value. And where do I want you to look it up? Well, I want you to look it up on the rows. So if I type in row, and there you can see it actually has a function called row, but we want this one here. It's a different symbol. So we just double click on that. And then the match type you want is an exact match. So you can see you actually have a less than or greater than, but we want it to be exact. And then if I close the bracket around that, so now all we've done is we've said, okay, I want to use this match formula to determine what row number I want you to look at. That's fine. So if I put a comma now, and now I want to do the same for the column. So if I type match, and then I do the lookup value. Now the lookup value now is text. And we know that the header of the column is QTY. So if I do, just do it in lowercase as well. So I want to look for that specific text. Now if there's a misspelling or if there's a space, it won't find it. So we just need to be aware of that. And I'll demonstrate this later on. And then where do I want you to look? Well, we've called it column. So if I type column and then select here, and then put a comma, and then I want to go exact match. And now if I press close brackets now here's something to be aware of. You've got 3 functions nested together. Now there's always a pair of brackets with each function. So here we've got and they're normally colored here, so you can see these are kind of brownish. That's the first match, and brownish again for the second match. If I was to leave this now and press return, it would say there's an error and suggest a possible resolution. But what I want to do is I want to close that, and you'll see it'll kind of go bold for a second, which means it's matched off with another set of brackets, if you like. So now we've enclosed all of that, and we can press return, and there you have the value. Now in this case, why has that done that? Okay, need to check on that later why that figure is different, but if we look at the table we'll see that it is different. Let me have a look. So it's a good example actually, because the reason it's misreading is because the range is slightly out. So what I want to do is I want to go back and check on the named ranges. So if I go to formulas, name manager, and in this case it'll be the row. So if I click on that and then go edit, so it's very complicated here, but I need it to be possibly from F2. Let me just try that. So I'm just going to highlight F2 down. It's always worth doing a check because sometimes it doesn't quite read the correct thing. So if I click close, there you go. So what has it done? Well, in this column, you don't want it to look at the first row. So it's just kind of offsetting, if you like, where it's reading. So here's the first one. All it was doing was kind of shifting it down. So it's worth doing a QA check to see where it's looking to make sure you get the right result for that particular number. It'll only need to be done on the setup. So now the next stage is to copy it down really. Now you could write out the formula, but if you look at this here, we've got a named range there. We've got an absolute reference there. We've got these are all absolute. By the named range is absolute, the row is absolute, the column's absolute. The quantity isn't. So when I copy it down, so if I right click here, copy, and if I highlight down on these two cells and I right click and paste function here or formula, then it will copy exactly the same thing. So now if I go into this cell and type in date into this bit and press return, it will return the date. Now here of course the format isn't correct, so if I just go in there and change that format to date, just do this before we start changing that one, and we'll change that to currency. Click OK, and if I change this one, now I have to be careful here because the name in the column is order excluding VAT. So I right click, copy, and then go into here. I just need to Control V. So you see it is order excluding VAT, and that's obviously a complicated thing. So it's looking up the correct thing there. So just to quickly recap, we've gone in. We know the name of the data array, so the index part of it, that's the SD, that's the range it's looking at. Then we've used a match for the row number, and in that match we've referred to this specific cell A6, and we've then referred to a named range, which is the row from F2, I think it is, all the way down to F1900, sorry, F5194. And then we've used a similar approach for quantity, except in this case we've used text instead of an absolute cell reference, and then we've put in the column, which is the range, and we've again specified we want exact matches. And all we've done now is when we've copied this down, we've just changed the text in here because it's referring to the same thing for the cell there. Now let's just take a breather when I refer to my notes. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to refer, instead of typing out quantity, etc. You can make it a little bit more versatile. You can actually go in and say, okay, the lookup value I want to make A7. So if I click on that cell, and I also want it to be absolute, so I don't want it to move around, and I click return, it's going to come up with NA, and the reason for that is because it's not the same spelling. So there's two ways of dealing with this. You can either put quantity in here, QTY, That solves the problem. Or you can go back to the data and then type in quantity in here, and again that should solve the problem. So you can see it does that. Now if you copy the formula down now, actually what I can do is if I take out the reference there. Now the reason I've done that is when I copy this down it will change the row, so you'll see that it will do that. Obviously the formulas, let me just quickly check, copy and paste formats. So order value is incorrect again because it isn't order value, it's actually order excluding VAT. Copy, let me just do that, and then paste. There you go. So all I've done there is make it a little bit more sophisticated in that you don't have to individually change the text here. So looking at the lookup value, you're referring to these cells. So as a bonus, what I can do is I can say, okay, I want to have location. Now I know location is in there, so if I now copy this down, it will tell me the location. And you can do that with obviously any column header name that is in there. So you can build, again, a similar reference table to be able to do that. So there's another little thing that I want to show you, which is to add some data validation to the cells. Now, the reason I'm doing this, I'm just going to select these cells here. And then if you go to data, actually before I do that, I'm going to go to the sample data. I'm going to highlight that, and then I'm going to call it, actually no, we already have a name for it, don't we? Let me just make sure I've got it right. So if you go to data validation, and we're looking at this bit here, data validation, and you use the selection here to pick a list, and then if you go to right column, should be equals column, oops, equals. So what am I doing here? I'm basically saying I want to have a kind of a limit the selection for these cells by referring to a list, and the list I'm referring to is that named range called column. So when I press return, anything that's already in there won't be affected. You have to overwrite it, or you have to select from the new list. If I do that and click OK, you see a little drop down arrow appears, and now you can select between anything that's in there. So I could go type, tells me the shirt. I could click order number. It's a bit silly because it's already based on the order number. I could put down, let's see, serial. It's kind of reference for shirts in this case. So what it's allowing me to do is it's allowing me to pick and choose. So I can pick from a list, and also you're not likely to have a spelling mistake because you're already looking at something that's in the table. So you kind of get rid of that. So that's quite handy, a little bit of a bonus. So there's a lot going on in there, but you can see how flexible it can be in terms of you know, moving the table around, in terms of the column order, in terms of the row orders. But also it can be quite robust as well. So you're less likely to have errors when you do this. Again, it's a little bit more sophisticated than VLOOKUP. You can see that because of the flexibility of having the column in a particular order, or you're having the column number specified, for example. You can get around that. So to finish off with then, what I was going to do is just cover or recover some of the possible pitfalls that can happen. Missing lookup values. So you might be searching for something that isn't there. Now that could be because it literally isn't there, or it could be because there's a space, or there's a misspelling, or something along those lines. So that's a possibility that you can check for. It's always worth, by the way, doing a kind of quality assurance. So when you set these things up for the first time, just pick a test, i.e. check what's being returned and say, is this correct? And do maybe 5 or 6 just to say, well, is it doing what I'm expecting it to do? So that's always worth doing. I mentioned earlier on, spaces on the end of text or numbers can cause errors. There's a feature in here called text to columns up here, and if you just do a drop down, it's not going to make much sense in this context, but let's do it in the same context. So go to sample data, go to the order number, select from the data tab text to columns. Now delimited or fixed width, we want to be doing delimited here. Don't worry about fixed width. It gives you a view of what's going to happen in the box there. If you click next, you can go to a number of types of delimiter. That just means how the data is separated. It's normally used for something different, but it's quite good at resolving this problem. If you click on space and take tab, then in this case it's going to separate out order number, so we won't go the whole way with this. But what it will do is if there are any spaces after these order numbers, it will get rid of them. So you would go to next and you would sort of scroll, so you can specify what type you want to make them, but don't worry about that. If I was to click finish now, it would clear out any spaces, but the problem for me would be is it would create another column now which would overwrite, so I'm not going to do that. But it's just a feature you can use to get rid of spaces, so it's always worth knowing about. Column headers could be misspelt, so we saw that before where quantity was QTY, or here was a more complicated description of the order value. So you need to be aware that the spelling obviously has to match. You can get rid of that problem by doing what we did with the drop down in the data validation, so that's worth keeping in mind. Missing columns, obviously if the column's not there full stop, then it's not going to return anything because it can't find it. Now that might be, for VLOOKUP, that might be that the column number doesn't exist because the column table only goes up to 10 and we need column 12, for example. Or in this case, you've specified a text such as quantity, and quantity isn't included in the column. Again, this will deal with that to an extent, but what you've got to bear in mind is that if the table shrinks and the range is set to a bigger range, it might not necessarily be the correct outcome. Columns changing order, that affects VLOOKUP. Not selecting exact values, so if you accidentally leave it on 1, or you accidentally don't add 0 in there, or false, depends on which one you're using, then you will get a potential error, and you won't be able to tell it's an error as well unless you double check it. So just be very careful with that one. Ranges change in size, so more rows or more columns being added. Again, you just need to go into the name manager and check to make sure that your named ranges that you're using cover everything you need them to cover. It's probably worth doing a review every now and again for that. And one thing you can do is once you've got this set up, you don't necessarily want anybody interfering with it. So what you can do is protect the cells. So you can either, let's say for example here, we know this is going to be a free text. In other words, we want to be able to type whatever we want in there. So you can go here briefly up to the Home tab, and you can go into this thing called alignment. When you do that, you'll end up with a number of options in cell protection. If you untick locked, this will become clear. What you're saying is that cell, because you've got it selected, is going to be unlocked when the sheet is protected. We click OK, and then if you now go to review, protect sheet. Now you have a number of options here, but let's just leave this for the time being. You can select different things you are allowed to happen. You can also set a password. I don't recommend setting a password unless it is very sensitive data that you don't want to change, because if you forget the password, that's it. So I normally leave it blank, and it's just enough to deter people. If I click OK now, so now it doesn't look particularly different, but if I click on this cell here, and let's say we've got a complicated formula in there, and I just try and type anything, just clicked on the keyboard, it doesn't allow me to do anything because it's protected. If I go on to this one, however, and let's say I change that to an M, which I know is not going to have anything in it. So you can see that I can change that, and you can see that this will obviously update. That's an error because there's nothing there and I haven't got the if error formula there. If I just click undo, then it goes back. So what am I really doing there? I'm protecting from people coming in and blundering over your formulas and changing them or amending them, either deliberately or accidentally. It can happen. So you can protect the sheet. Here, you obviously do want people to be able to put information in, to be able to search, so you would leave that unprotected. And you did that here by clicking on the box here and change that. Now, when you're in protection mode, you can't go in and adjust things. So let me just change this back. You go back to review, you click unprotect. That's it. You can now change. So if I go there, it changes things. So that was just something useful if you want to protect, and obviously it works for your sheets in general if you want to protect certain areas from people overwriting either accidentally or deliberately. And I think that's it. So there's an awful lot of information there. There's an awful lot of useful things. I just encourage you to play and get used to the idea of using the named ranges or using the various functions together, and then yeah, just getting used to using the information. Thanks very much.